Be honest with me for a second. Does your classroom's inquiry practice ever feel, well, kind of like a formulaic project checklist? Like everyone's just going through the motions? Or maybe on the flip side, do you ever feel like your underlying philosophy of inquiry is so beautifully abstract that you literally struggle to teach it on a chaotic Tuesday morning when half the class hasn't done the reading and the bell's about to ring? Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a fascinating comparison of two absolute titans in the field, Kath Murdoch and Kathy Short. If you've ever wrestled with how to make inquiry both rigorously practical and profoundly meaningful, you are in exactly the right place.
Here's a quick roadmap of what we'll be covering in this explainer. We'll start with two views on inquiry, then look at Murdoch as the practical architect, followed by Short's philosophical stance. Then we'll synthesize them to see why they're better together, and finally, look at the broader inquiry landscape.
Section 1. Two views on inquiry, defining the baseline. Let's just dive right in and establish exactly what we mean when we say inquiry in the context of these two amazing educators. To kick things off, it's absolutely crucial to understand where these two authors actually agree. Based on our source material, both Kath Murdoch and Kathy Short completely align on one major thing. True inquiry is far, far more than just doing projects. We all know what that looks like, right? The rushed shoebox diorama you assign at the end of a semester just to say, hey, we did something hands-on. Yeah, that's not inquiry. For both Murdoch and Short, inquiry is fundamentally a way of thinking, relating, questioning, and constructing meaning. It's really about living intellectually with uncertainty, rather than just rushing to a predetermined answer. That shared, deep respect for student thinking is the baseline we're building on today. But here's the rub. It's a massive juggling act. As educators, we constantly face this dual need in our day-to-day practice, asking ourselves two very distinct questions. First, how do I actually plan and scaffold this learning so it doesn't devolve into total chaos? And second, what beliefs about my learners and the curriculum actually have to change for this to be authentically student-centered? Well, it turns out Murdoch and Short each answer one of these questions perfectly. Section 2. Murdoch, the practical architect. Pedagogy and practice. If you're sitting there asking, okay, but how do I actually plan this? Kath Murdoch is your go-to.
She provides the blueprints, the scaffolds, the visible framing for our metaphorical house of inquiry. When we talk about inquiry as pedagogy and practice, we're talking about her very tangible six-step cycle. Murdoch gives us a highly accessible way to organize curriculum without losing our minds. Imagine you're starting a unit on local ecosystems. You don't just hand your kids a textbook and say, read chapter 4. No way. Instead, you tune in by taking them to a polluted local creek. Then they find out the necessary data through research. They spend time sorting out what that data means, going further to explore deeper concepts like human impact, making conclusions, and finally, taking action and reflecting on what they can actually do to help. This isn't just a list, it's an incredibly helpful, structured flow for realistically facilitating a real-world investigation. Under Murdoch's framework, your role as the teacher is remarkably clear. You are the designer. You aren't just opening the doors and letting students run wild. You are carefully, deliberately planning provocations. A provocation might be a mysterious artifact left on a desk, or an unexpected video played the second they walk in, designed to instantly spark questions. You utilize visible thinking routines, and you're doing assessment for learning every single step of the way. It's a systematic approach where you gradually release responsibility to the active, investigating student. Bottom line, Murdoch gives you the architecture to make inquiry happen even in the absolute busiest of classrooms. All right, Section 3, Short, the philosophical stance, living the curriculum. Let's shift gears to our next thinker. If Murdoch builds the visible architecture, Kathy Short focuses on the rich, fertile soil our house is actually built on. For Kathy Short, inquiry is absolutely not a step-by-step method. She views it as an epistemological stance. In her view, the curriculum itself emerges as an investigation of the world. It's a disposition toward questioning, uncertainty, dialogue, interpretation, and meaning-making. This is a profound shift in thinking. Her approach is much less cycle-driven and much more recursive and emergent. It means that inquiry isn't something you do from 10 to 11 a.m. on Thursdays. It's the way you and your students exist together in this space, growing organically from student tensions, social issues, literature, and open dialogue. Because of this deep philosophical framing, Short sees your role as the teacher shifting pretty dramatically. You aren't just the designer of a cyclical unit anymore. You're a co-learner. You're a curriculum maker right alongside your kids.
Instead of planning a rigid provocation 3 weeks in advance, you might notice a real tension happening out on the playground and deliberately bring in a specific piece of literature to help students unpack that cultural experience together. You are deeply integrating language, literature, multimodality, and culture into the learning process. The learner isn't just an active investigator hunting for facts. They are a meaning maker. Short forces us to examine our fundamental beliefs about knowledge and children.
Section 4. Better Together. A synthesis. Building the house. Now, it is so tempting to pit these two authors against each other, setting up this epic battle of the practical versus the theoretical. But choosing between them, that's a massive pedagogical mistake.
The crucial point here comes down to the very real risks of misusing either approach in isolation. If you only look at Murdoch, your active investigator risks just going through the motions of a formulaic checklist. We've all seen this, where the goal becomes finishing the sorting out worksheet rather than following genuine curiosity. It totally kills the joy of discovery. On the flip side, if you only rely on Short, the role of the meaning maker risks becoming way too abstract to operationalize. Without planning structures, it can be paralyzing for a teacher to implement Short's beautiful philosophy, leading to lessons that feel, frankly, untethered. So, it turns out, they aren't rivals at all. A strong inquiry framework synthesizes them perfectly. Think of our house metaphor again. Murdoch provides the visible design, the solid scaffolding, the planning, the cycles, the assessments. Short provides the philosophical integrity, the deep roots, the learner voice, the cultural perspectives. When you bring them together, you get the absolute best of both worlds. There's this incredibly powerful summary from the source material that serves as the absolute crux of this entire explainer. It says, Murdoch gives teachers a usable architecture for inquiry. Short asks whether the architecture rests on genuinely inquiry-oriented beliefs about knowledge, children, language, culture, and curriculum. That is everything right there. You need both the usable architecture to make it happen and the deep inquiry-oriented beliefs to ensure it's actually meaningful. Without the beliefs, the architecture is empty. Without the architecture, the beliefs have nowhere to live. Section 5. The broader inquiry landscape, expanding the framework. To fully furnish this educational house we've been building, we have to look slightly beyond our two main architects to the broader landscape of thinkers. Let's start with the historical foundations, because inquiry isn't some new, flashy educational fad. Nearly all modern inquiry traces back to John Dewey, who reminded us over a century ago that learning is about lived experience and active problem-solving. That's supported by Jerome Bruner, who introduced the brilliantly simple idea of the spiral curriculum, meaning even complex ideas can be accessed by young learners if appropriately scaffolded. Add in Joseph Schwab for the rigorous structure of science disciplines, and Gordon Wells, who roots the whole process in dialogue and sociocultural theory, and you have a totally solid foundation. But any robust exploration has to look at the critics too. Even as a die-hard inquiry advocate, you absolutely must engage with researchers like Kirshner, Sweller, and Clark. They famously argue that minimally guided instruction overloads a student's working memory. And you know what? This critique is actually fantastic for the field. It forces us to be hyper-clear about explicit teaching. It leads directly to the highly guided, well-defended models from folks like Himelo Silver, Duncan, and Chin. And it's exactly why experts like Carol Kolthow and Trevor McKenzie insist on practical, heavily scaffolded models. Inquiry only works when we take scaffolding seriously. Finally, modern theorists are expanding our horizons for today's learners. Carla Marshall and Rachel French are brilliant for connecting inquiry to concept-based curriculums, pushing for intellectual transfer so students can take a concept learned in science and apply it to history. And contrast that with Vivian Vasquez, whose work is absolutely essential for pushing inquiry into critical pedagogy. She focuses intensely on power, identity, and social justice, ensuring kids aren't just learning about the world, but learning how to challenge and change it. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on before you walk into your classroom tomorrow. Ask yourself, is your inquiry built on a strong philosophical foundation? And does it have the sturdy architecture to actually stand up to the reality of teaching? Are you bringing both the blueprints and the beliefs to your learners every single day? Remember, the real magic happens when Kath Murdoch's practical design meets Kathy Short's deep integrity. Combine the structure with the stance, and you aren't just teaching a unit, you are transforming how your students interact with the world. Keep building, keep questioning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.